In 2014, I became the last lead pastor resident at Mars Hill Church, which was, of course, right as it was collapsing. And it began a season of soul searching for me, where I'm just like, God, why did you let this happen to me and to us? And don't you love your church? Don't you want her to thrive? And what I learned through that time of reflecting and repenting and healing was God was using this to give us a second chance. He was using something as awful as the tragedy of Mars Hill as an opportunity for us to learn and for us to really get to a place where He could even use our wounds to help heal others. Because God is faithful. For my residency, I was sent down to Tacoma, but the guys who were supposed to be pouring into me were jumping ship from the Titanic before it sank, and I kind of accidentally ended up planting a church with the guy who was the lead pastor there at the Mars Hill Tacoma location. This is, of course, while Trinity was also replanting here in Seattle. And the guy who I was replanting with, he became my mentor. He was a lead pastor already for a number of years. Before that, was a few steps ahead of me, and he gave me opportunities to preach and teach that I hadn't had before. He gave me opportunities to lead and shepherd. And he let me fail so that I could learn how to be a flourishing lead pastor. So I'm super thankful for that time and that season of being invested in and poured into. But I've had conversations with countless pastors since then that break my heart. The stories I hear are not anything like that story I just told of getting invested in. It's more like pastoral loneliness and isolation and a fear of failure and really a waning joy in Jesus, in a profession, in a role that should have a ton of joy. Getting a front row seat to God's work through His church often ends up being something that's so burdensome that it becomes unsustainable. And people hit the eject button on pastoral ministry after only a few years. And so really what we have is a pastoral epidemic. We've got very few people wanting to become pastors to begin with. Those that do, often their charisma outpaces their character and ends in some sort of moral failure, and we get the news headlines for all of those things. And then there's a small group of people who really do love Jesus and His church and want to be faithful, but again, after so much burdensome, taxing years, it's not something that they feel like they can sustain. Why is that? A lot of this comes down to the fact that guys haven't been equipped. They haven't been taught how to have years of faithful and healthy ministry. They come out of the academic context, and seminary is great and necessary, but it's not able to transition people into everyday life and ministry. You need to practically work out what you've learned in seminary in the context of ministry. You need to learn what you haven't learned. You need to learn what you don't know. And so at Trinity, we're excited to start a lead pastor residency because, one, we can see a future where there are more news headlines of pastors who retire after decades of faithful service rather than some of those stories we heard before. we could see a future where there are more and more people who love Jesus and his church and his mission as a result of those pastors' faithful decades of service. And really, we're starting a lead pastor residency because we love Jesus and we love his church and we want to see her thrive. You know, my story reminds me that God is faithful. And I want to be like him. I want to be faithful too. And I want to help more pastors be faithful like him as well.